tell me when.
That's good. That's good.
You good?
Yeah, that's good.
You good, Danny?
I think so.
Yeah?
Cool. Perfect.
Awesome.
Yeah, I love the proximity effect on my voice. It's like, yeah, I have a really cool deep voice, because I'm close to the microphone.
All right. Let's see. Do. How you doing, Kate?
I'm good. How are you?
Yeah, I'm all right. I'm all right.
There we go.
Oh, there it is.
Our original jingle.
Yeah, it's just to give Kate a little taste of what our show is like.
Got the dancing going on.
Yeah,
It sounds just like the Tour de France videos I've been watching.
Yes. Thank you. That's exactly what I was going. That's exactly the vibe that I was going for. When I explained, so my nephew did this for us.
Cool.
He put the music together for us, and when I gave him when I told him what I wanted, I played a little bit of like Tour de France stuff for him. Like that 80,
Like
87,
Kraftwerk.
80. Yeah. Some Yanni and some John Tesh. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what I wanted. That's exactly what I wanted it to sound like and the vibe that we were going for. And I guess he nailed it because you got it. Whoa. That was interesting.
Audio is a mystery.
Yeah, well, you having studied audio and worked in a recording studio, you would know that.
It's crazy because we would have recording sessions. I was working at for the school, and we recorded every recital in the music department.
Mm-hmm.
And we would have just like these buzzes or something, and you just like tear out your hair trying to come up with what it was, and it turns out that your high powered like interface or something like that was not plugged into like a grounded power source, and that's what it would be. And it's just like, okay, you pull out all the wires, like, are the cables busted? And it's just, oh no, actually, you just plugged it into a power strip, and you should plug it into the wall.
And so that was was that back home? Was that in North Carolina?
Yeah, North Carolina when I was in undergrad.
Huh.
Yeah, long time ago.
And so is that before or after you did music?
That was when I was in
right?
music. Yeah.
So you were doing both at the same time.
Yeah. That was my job.
So that was your job while you were studying music? Mm-hmm. Oh, very cool.
Yeah. And through that job, I was able to get enough knowledge to go to graduate school for acoustics at Johns Hopkins. And then when I was there, I had an architecture blog that went viral, and then I became an architecture critic for 6 years, and then I switched to cycling journalism. And now I do both at the same time. So just kind of like that is the most truncated version I can give.
No, I know that's much, you're much deeper than that. So we don't need to, we can unpack it here. That's the beauty of the show,
Okay.
right? We can just roll it all out little by little because it's intense what you do and what you've done in your life.
Yeah, I've had a life.
So far, right? Interesting. I mean, you like let yourself just get whipped around by, all your different likes and
Very
interests, right?
Very true. I'm like the dog chasing after a ball.
Yeah, but interesting balls. Because
the balls have been pretty good in my opinion.
Yeah, no, they've been great. I'm down for it all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting balls.
So true.
Yeah. No, very cool. So thanks for coming out.
Yeah.
We have the incomparable Kate Wagner
Thank you.
joining us.
Just a neighborhood gal.
She
really.
just kind of walked up to the stoop and said, "Hey, can I get on your podcast?" But yeah, thanks for coming on. So we have a guest. We haven't had a guest since Ultra Romance.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Another stellar person in the world of cycling media.
All things bikes. Yeah.
All things bikes.
Wait,
yeah.
who?
So he goes by the handle Ultra Romance. I don't know if you've heard of him.
Oh yeah, on Twitter. I think I follow him on Twitter.
Yeah, he's really big on like
Instagram. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
He
I think my husband follows him also.
yeah, a lot of people do. He's if you're in bikes, like I think
Yeah. It's
almost
like
everyone
one of those
seems to
accounts that
follow
just
him.
will eventually show up.
yeah.
Big account.
So we're like killing it like with our guests because this is 2 for 2 and both have been insanely good. I mean, I can tell already.
Culture and racing.
Yeah.
now. So
love racing.
we're kind of yeah.
Culture.
You know, and I was looking at your Twitter. You love the kind of racing that I love because you're like, that's my wheelhouse, 80s, 90s cycling. I believe you said cycling peaked in 1985.
It was
right?
so funny because so the story is that when I became a cycling journalist, so let's back up. First of all, I married a cyclist.
And did he race?
He raced juniors.
He raced juniors.
Yeah, and then he
And is that because your father-in-law encouraged him? Because your father-in-law seems to be a bit of a...
He was no my in-laws are cyclists, but my husband raced because he was like, I guess, like the boy equivalent of in love with Mario Cipollini.
Oh, that's
So
cool.
when my husband was racing as a junior, and these are some great photographs, let me just say.
That's quite the man crush.
You have like this ginger kid from Maryland, and he's rocking like the Seiko jersey with Cannondale bike, Spinergy wheels, like the kind that can kill you. And yeah, that was his setup. And he was racing, I think, for about like 5 years, and then. Yeah, I think he got into girls by that point. It was
that was late 90s, right? Late 90s, early 2000s?
Like, early 2000s
yeah,
for
that's
sure.
Cipollini, right?
Yeah, he was watching, like, I was asking him last night, and he said he first started watching the tour when he was a kid in, like, 98.
What a year to start watching.
I know, truly. We just rewatched the 98 tour, and it was so funny because, like, I'll go into this later. This is something we should bring up at some point.
Festina.
Yeah, we should bring
Dublin.
this up.
Oh, yeah.
We need to bring this up. But anyways, he got into cycling, but his parents were cyclists and still are cyclists. They are ultra touring cyclists, so they've biked across the country.
Nice.
And that's what they did the second they both retired. They're both engineers. My mother-in-law's a chemical engineer, and my father-in-law's a mechanical engineer, and he actually just patented a new type of recumbent bike.
Does he own a recumbent company, or is it just the patents that he has?
He has the patents, and I think I think it's called G4 Bikes.
Okay.
Company. So, plugging that. But very cool bike. Very super aero bike.
Aero recumbent.
Aero recumbent bike.
Yeah, talk
And
about
he is
nerdy.
also the North American 60-plus 12-hour time trial champion for recumbent bikes.
Nice.
So when they do these long rides like across the country or
They're touring cyclists.
they're doing it on recumbents.
They did they've done some like ultra cycling rides like on recumbents, but at this point they were on upright bikes. This was several years ago. And they were doing it where they were bike packing, but they were going hotel to hotel. So they weren't like camping. They didn't bring camping gear. They're not really camping people.
My friend calls it.
Yeah, that's true. But it was like that was the trade-off, I think. I think the trade-off was we're not going to camp in the
I don't think that's bad.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely like that version of touring because you can take a shower.
Yes.
Yeah.
But anyways, like they did that and then they came back and they've just been cyclists like ever since forever. My father-in-law has a whole workshop because he's fabricated the frames and everything for his recumbent bikes. And so he is like an industrial level hobbyist.
Oh, very cool.
And so, but yeah, so that's how I got into cycling. And then when I first got a decent bike through them because they were friends with these rich triathletes who were just cleaning out their shed, and they had this Cervelo time trial bike from 2003 that they just needed to get rid of because no one wants a time trial bike from 2003. And so I got it, and I was like, this is the coolest thing I've ever seen in my life. This looks like a spaceship. I have to have this. So they gave it to me, and it was too big. But anyways, I rode it, and it's now like my bike fitter was like, you can't ride this bike anymore. Like, you're going to blow out your knee. Please stop riding this and ride it.
Wait, let's back up here. So you have a bike fitter. Who's your bike fitter?
Oh, I just go to BFF.
Okay, cool.
Because they have ladies there, and ladies know ladies.
Yeah.
But then I was like, there was no way to make the geometry of this bike work for your body in a way that either you cannot like get off the bike because you have the sightage, or like it was just the frame was too big. But at the time, like I didn't know that. It was like my first bike, and then shortly after I got a Bianchi steel frame bike to do grocery runs, and it has panniers and everything. So anyways, but I got really into cycling because we moved to Chicago, and we were living in Baltimore. It was too hard to cycle because the infrastructure was bad and people were just starting to kill you all the time. And in Chicago, they threaten to kill you all the time. The infrastructure is better. So I started, like 4 miles. Oh, I'm dying. 8 miles, I'm dying. 20 miles, I'm dying. Then it was like, okay, 100 miles, I'm good.
Nice.
And so then we just got like mega into shape. I was Zwifting. I was like trying to learn cyclocross. I was just really into it. And then I was like, we got to watch the Tour de France. So I watched the Tour de France. This was 2020. And long story short, I became very obsessed.
Yeah, I could tell that.
Had you written anything
No.
cycling related before then?
No.
So you've only been doing this like a couple of years.
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that. I thought you were in the game a little bit longer.
No. Yeah, it's pretty
Wow.
crazy. Yeah.
Good for you.
So this is like a result of the pandemic.
Yeah, this was a pandemic fixation that has outlasted the pandemic and will probably outlast most things in my life.
Well, you know what? Good for us.
Good for us. Good for us.
This is one of those things where I tell people, see, there's good things to come out of this. This is a good thing. I've read a little bit of your stuff, and I've been looking at I by a couple of the things that I've read about you and your Twitter. I'm already kind of aligned with her, Danny. Her love of 80s and 90s cycling
Nice.
is like right there. You had me at 80s and 90s. You had me at Laurent Fignon.
I'm so obsessed. Okay.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Not as obsessed as me, right, Dan?
Probably not.
Right.
Who still sports a ponytail
Very
since
cool, very cool.
1986,
And we saw him
87.
race here in Chicago.
Yeah.
We were there.
Oh, okay.
We were there together. Grant Park, I
It
think.
was yeah.
Johnny Buño.
Oh, I have stories about hanging out with Laurent.
Gatorade.
Oh my God.
And there's a little blog post. I'll send you the link. Someone in Chicago had a blog post with their own photos, just like real basic photos, but like amazing. So anyway, sorry, just real quick. I'll be that guy. But so you're born in North Carolina.
Yes.
You lived in Maryland,
Yes, I went to grad school in Maryland.
in Maryland, and then Chicago.
Yes.
Okay.
And then, so after I watched the Tour de France, I wrote my first essay about it because I was sad that Roglic lost because it was like pretty devastating loss. I actually have never rewatched the footage.
What a tour to start kind of getting
It was a
into
great
the tour.
It was a great tour.
That's amazing.
That was a great
the
tour.
penultimate one where the penultimate stage time trial where Pogacar beat
Well,
Roglic.
very much like
Yes, very much like
89.
yes. It is like the closest to 89. I think that it's actually I feel like a little bit more close to 87.
87 with Pedro Delgado
Yeah.
and Stephen Roach.
Stephen Roach, yeah.
And that time trial,
The margins were a lot wider in that case, and it was Pogacar.
Oh,
yeah,
look at that. I have goosebumps because that 87 tour made me a huge fan of Pedro Delgado,
he was very cool.
and who won in 1988. And by 1990, I was living in his hometown, knocking on his door and telling him I wanted to race bicycles with him.
True story.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
So, yeah, I dropped out of high school, got a job,
This is
saved
the most
money.
cycling story I've ever heard.
And then I flew to his hometown and lived in his hometown and made friends with the bike shop that he started at. And one day we were riding by his house and my friend told me to get out and knock on the door because that guy was going to go for a bike ride with us. And I had no idea that, it was Pedro Delgado's house. I thought we were just picking up another cyclist and he answers the door. It was awesome.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
That is so cool.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. What year was it where he was he 15 minutes late for the TT? What year?
That was 89.
That was
without
89.
Yeah, so without him, there isn't that great 89 Tour
Yeah.
de France. And that was kind of a joke in his hometown, there was always a lot of reasons.
I can imagine.
Yeah, yeah.
That's going to stick with you forever.
Yeah, yeah. But, he's a television guy for Spanish television.
Yep.
So he's a commentator and, he's the face of Spanish TV cycling.
It's amazing how many of those guys stuck around to be commentators. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, and here in this country, we've got Christian Van de Velde,
Bob Roll,
who's a local guy.
Bob Roll, from
Roll.
7-Eleven.
Yep.
Bob Key.
Yeah.
He's getting a little old. So is
Little bit.
Phil Liggett is so old.
Yeah.
Phil Liggett had gray hair in the 90s.
He looked old in the 90s.
Yeah, I
and
know.
you're watching those videos right now. He always
it's
seemed
all
like
of his videos, which is gets me to my next point, which is that after I watched the Tour de France in 2020, I went back and watched every Grand Tour
you're nuts.
and every Classics race back to 2011.
Wow.
Really?
And then Like that's what I would like wake up at 6 a.m. to watch cycling, and then it would be like, I don't know, 10 o'clock in the morning when it's done. Then I would work, and then at like 6, 7 p.m. I would watch it until midnight, old cycling. And then I slowly just made my way through these years. And sometimes like it depends. Sometimes you would get full stages.
Yeah.
Sometimes you would get highlights. Sometimes you would get clips, but like you made the sort of best of it. But this is what I was getting with the 80 cycling, is that recently there's this account on YouTube called like Cycling Classics or something, or Classic Cycling. And I'd watched a few of their videos before because they have like a Sunday in Hell on there. And so in the last 10 months, they've uploaded like Tour de France, all these old Phil Liggett Tour de France specials that were developed for VHS or for like archival footage or like mail order, called World of Cycling.
Yeah.
And so like they have almost all of them. There's like really not a year from, I don't know, like 1980 through
Surprised that
2008, I think that they
Those
don't
are
have.
those are great videos. So the shop that
so great.
the shop that I worked at had them, and you could rent
Yeah.
the videos.
I had a couple. I think I want to say the tour where Le Mans retired, where he quit the race,
Yeah.
if I'm not mistaken. I had that one. But so I can't believe they have the right to kind of show them. Is
I don't
it
know
an
if they
official
do.
licensing thing, or they're just...
Maybe I shouldn't even put this on the podcast that they have them, but like they do, and that's all that matters. And I'm like ripping all of them to my hard drive.
Have you seen 23 Days in July? The
Yes.
Phil Anderson.
I have seen that.
Yeah.
I saw that like 2 years ago though.
Okay.
That was like a Sunday in Hell and 22 Days in July. Those are the first two that I like.
That's a
watched.
great one. So that's a really good
That
one.
is like-
And the Hell of the North with just a silent opening. And just him cleaning the derailleurs.
Oh my god!
I mean, that's a classic. Even if you're not into bicycle racing,
Yeah.
like,
It's an art film,
It's
I
a
think.
great film, and I actually have a book. I don't know who wrote it. Maybe you saw it. I forgot the title, but it's a book about the film, and it goes step by step.
Yeah.
And he has all these screenshots, and it's an actual book, and he goes through the whole movie.
I'm proud of you, Kate, because those are the movies that I would have recommended. You know, like if I wanted to get someone sucked into cycling, those are, I mean, either you do or you don't, but I mean, those are movies those are very old school movies. And I have to explain those movies to a lot of people these days, and the fact that you've consumed them already.
It feels like a Horton collection, like
Yeah.
classic movie.
If
Like it
you
has
like
the vibe and
films from that era, you will like these movies regardless of whether you're into cycling.
Oh, and just cycling at the time, because, you know, it gives you an understanding of where you're, you know, like where you're at now, but where you're coming from, where you came from, you know, it's like.
It's the same with those old Eddie Merckx documentaries. It seems like they came out with a new Eddie Merckx documentary like every year when he was riding. But they have a lot of those on YouTube too, and it's like amazing. My husband loves those. He loves watching like Eddie Merckx at like his prime.
eating a steak at 6 a.m.
Incessantly changing
I was gonna say,
his seat position,
his little
and,
Allen key.
tweaking it and pulling over.
Yeah, I mean, he was. Yeah, I mean, these are really iconic things, and we don't have an equivalent to that. Like, okay, like this. I was making this point. I was like, the World of Cycling videos. When, of course, they were probably discontinued when like streaming became available, or like 2008 or somewhere around there. But it's like those were really great for explaining the narrative of a grand tour. That's why they're like 2 hours, 3 hours long. But what we have now is worse, because what we have now is like we have streaming, and yes, it's true. You make a deal with the devil. In Tour de France, Giro d'Italia, you often, in Vuelta sometimes you get full stages, like the full like 5 hour stage. But you don't get to keep it. Once the year is over, they basically purge all those videos, and that's it. I mean, like, if you wanted to go, for example, watch, like, the 2020 Ronde van Vlaanderen, like, just the race itself, like, there's kind of no way to do that legally. Whereas, like, but you pay a lot of money for these streaming subscriptions. It's really kind of the problem with streaming media in general. Like, we've seen this with HBO Max, for example, where they just purge a bunch of stuff so they can write it off their taxes. And it's like, no, like, this stuff is important for archival reasons.
100%.
And so, like, if the best you can do is, like, 15-minute highlights, like, that's not the same thing.
It sucks.
It sucks. And it's, like, I've become, like, really more involved with media issues in cycling journalism. And so, and maybe that's, like, a bit arrogant of me as I only started doing it 2 years ago. But as someone who worked as a critic for, I don't know, 6 years, it's just kind of natural to me. But also, like, I really think that cycling is a beautiful sport. I really think that it makes sense to take the time to, and there are people who do this. For example, Flanders Classics, the people who run the Ronde van Vlaanderen, they have this Ronde van Vlaanderen behind the scenes documentaries that they release every year, and they are wonderful. They go in the team cars, they interview like riders' parents, they go to the bars where everyone is getting absolutely trashed because it's Flanders during the Tour of Flanders. And these are like the closest things that we have to, and then teams of course release their own documentaries these days, and some of them are okay. Like the Jumbo-Visma 2019 Vuelta documentary was okay. Their documentaries since then have been really kind of, I want to say, like, it's almost like North Korea propaganda at this point. But the thing is,
I love that.
The thing is that like teams kind of suck at telling their own story.
Who was it the Australians? They had that backstage.
Yes,
that was
Orca
good.
Green Edge. Yeah,
that was good.
They were really funny.
Yeah, they were
this
funny.
is like a precursor to like TikTok culture.
I think part of it is like the Australian sense of humor. Like it's so
very
fun.
irreverent. Yeah,
But I agree. I think I don't know a lot about it, but I think my sense is it's obviously about rights, ASO,
yeah,
who owns the tours,
Of course.
and the Vuelta, right? So like super controlling.
very expensive.
They make it almost impossible, which we can get into. I just wanted to have a little bit of context though. So you were doing architecture criticism,
Yes,
and for like years,
6 years.
6 years, and which is super cool. I'd love to talk about that. But then, as you were saying, you switched, you got into the cycling journalism, and you've
Yeah.
only been doing it for 2 years. My first question is, were you like super determined to like make, quote unquote, make it? Or was it something that just kind of came along and you're like, wow, now I'm doing like, I'm writing for bicycling, I'm writing for like Velo News, I'm doing this kind of thing?
It's kind of both. I mean, so for context at the time, so I started writing about cycling in 2020. And at that time, there was lots of different changes in the media landscape because of two things. One, the pandemic really ran a train on media in general, especially new media. And two, Biden getting elected like really made it kind of impossible to have a certain left politics in media because you needed to cater to kind of like your Democratic Party donors. Like this sounds really petty and made up, but it's actually true. Like when I was writing for the New Republic, and before I was at the New Republic, I was at the Baffler. And my editor at the Baffler, Chris Lehman, is like more in the Bernie Sanders camp of doing things. And he moved to the New Republic, and basically they sacked him. The people who own the New Republic sacked him when Biden got elected and put in like a DC flunky in his place. And so I left with him. And that was my most prestigious media title because I was a print columnist in a major magazine. And after that, I became like kind of bitter, and also I lost a lot of work because of just these various like media catastrophes that happen all the time because media is terrible. And so I started moonlighting as a sports journalist. It wasn't so much that I switched, it's that I was supplanting my income with doing this because I lost a lot of freelance work through like just editorial changes, media companies closing, mergers and acquisitions. Like the pandemic was a really terrible time to be working as a freelancer. And so cycling kind of started being a side gig. And at that point, to give you a perspective of how quick this happened, I wrote my first essay in September of 2020. By July 2021, I was a correspondent at the Tour de France for a major magazine.
That's cool.
What magazine was that?
It was Pro Cycling before they folded.
Ah, very cool. Well, I think it helps that you have a fresh take on cycling.
People love that.
Yeah, well, because a lot of it is, people that have been into the sport for a long time and or come from the cycling side, longtime cyclists that get into journalism. But you're coming at it from a very your point of view is very different from what we're used to in regular cycling media.
I was going to make the same point.
Yeah, and so I think it's really refreshing. And like I said, I haven't gotten super deep with all of your writing yet, but the little bit that I've been able to consume is very different from what I've seen. And interesting to me because frankly, I don't read a lot, and unless it's in small blurbs. And I think your take is very interesting. It's fresh, and you can't help but notice how excited you are about the sport. It's actually excited me to see someone so excited about the sport and to love the things that I love. That's like 80s, 90s cycling, Laurent Fignon, Bollé sunglasses,
Oh, I love those Bollé sunglasses.
Oakley's, and I had every color of Bollé. I had all the interchangeable earpieces. I could make my custom nose pieces.
I have an important question. How do you feel about the Scott drop bars?
I think they're cool.
They were
That's it?
the cool guys. I have a brand new set in the box, new in the box.
Oh my God.
Greg LeMond drop-in.
Wow.
Okay, so like the thing is so funny that people say this to me actually quite often about like my fresh perspective and stuff like that, which was very true like a year ago. But now I've been through like 2 doping scandals. I don't know how true that is anymore.
Yeah, I mean, I think what I would encourage you to, don't get too down on it.
It's mostly like I actually think the thing that's made me like a little bit jaded is that like the media rights for cycling journalists have just been systemically reduced.
Yeah.
It's gotten worse and worse, like pretty much every year, and so like I will never know what it was like to cover the Tour de France in any kind of meaningful way. When it was COVID and I was there the first time, we had a mix zone, which is like a little barrier section where like you text the press officer and they bring a guy to you, and that was cool.
Yeah,
I was fine with that. I didn't know anything else. And then when we got to this year, they had sort of a mix zone, but also like it was kind of like it was just totally. And they basically took the opportunity in the chaos to make it so that only rights holders could interview cyclists at the finish line.
Really? Yeah. So
that's like, unacceptable. First of all, like we lost access to going to teams' hotels, to going to buses after the tour, not the paddock, but inside the bus before and after the tour. We lost, like, most of us lost unless you are really in with a writer or something, like, lost the ability to do individual interviews over the phone. So all that's left is to go to the paddock, and you don't get anything there. By the time the writers get to the paddock, their press officers have briefed them on what they're going to say. You don't get any kind of immediacy. You don't get any kind of honesty. It is, like, the worst landscape for media covering races live. It's, like, not even worth it to cover any kind of especially the Tour de France. It is not worth it to go to cover the Tour de France's written press at this point.
I think that the Tour de France is almost getting. I realize that it's the most important race in the world, but as far as racing goes and interest, it's for me, it's not. It's third after Vuelta, Giro, and as far as the Grand Tours of it like interest. I get the grandeur of it and the climbs and the courses are still what they are, but as far as like interesting racing and like what you get out of it, it's so packaged and
that's the thing. It's becoming a really sterile thing.
Yeah, it's really sterile.
And this benefits teams. Like limiting access to the written press benefits teams because the written presses are the only ones who do investigative journalism.
Yeah.
So like basically making it so it's not worth it for the written press to go to any cycling race is like basically making sure that no one is asking hard questions. Yeah. Because the rights holders, like, they won't do it. Yeah. They're there to sell a product. Or people like Netflix, for example, which is doing a documentary on the Tour de France. And it's like, it's not an objective documentary. This is just an entertainment product. And that's what they want to turn the Tour into. But the thing about cycling is that obviously it has a checkered past. It is rife with abuse. Even now, I can say personally that I know that there is like all kinds of abuse going on in cycling. And I'm not talking about drug abuse, which is the thing everyone cares about. I'm talking about like financial abuse. Oh, yeah. Like exploitation, worker exploitation. The whole stagiaire system is exploitative. The agent system is exploitative. Yeah. And like it's just a sketchy sport, and it still requires journalism. And like there's I think a misconception on the behalf of teams that think that the media is there to ruin their lives or something, or to like just get in on the gossip or whatever. It's like, look, if I wanted to gossip, I have plenty of things to gossip about. I don't need pro cycling for that. But the other thing is that I do what I like because I like cycling. And if I'm going after someone for being a scumbag, it's because I want cycling to not be the domain of scumbags. Yeah. I want a cycling that is healthy for everyone involved and that doesn't involve like ruining the dreams of young boys.
Well, it's like good old journalism, like seeking the truth. Yeah. My first tour that I covered as a credentialed journalist was 2011. So Cadell Evans, which was an amazing tour.
Very cool tour.
And then my second one was the year after with Wiggins.
Very cool tour.
And then I had a long break, and then I went back. But I noticed, I think I did 7 total. But I did notice every year was more and more restrictive.
Yeah.
And getting into the paddock, like I got in there a couple times. I was credentialed, but even if you were credentialed, like they have such a tiered system. And then it's, even when you're applying for your credential, like I think they do their research. Like they want, I have to say, I think they often just want friendly press.
Sure.
And like you said, it is a business. It's entertainment. It's just strange because if you go as a journalist, like you want to report good stories, compelling stories. Sometimes that means stuff that's not, entertainment. That's not friendly.
It's like
to the race.
If you don't want that stuff to happen, make sure it doesn't happen. That's not my problem.
Right. And the reality is, I mean, it's like any other event. It's a microcosm of like humanity.
Of course.
To reach too far, but it really is. And so you're going to have some bad actors. You're going to have, I mean, even to this day, we've seen it with some teams still.
Extremely
So
bad actors.
over time, I think I did 7. So over time, I saw it more and more restrictive. And there's all kinds of other weird stuff too. Like the ASO is, it's kind of crazy how they run it. They charge you for the internet when you're there.
Oh yeah, that's nuts. And they started
to
charging
promote
like
their
36
race.
euros a day.
Yeah, to promote their race, they charge you. It's kind of nuts. But I know recently. So you had a little dust up on social, and it was kind of about this topic, right? And I thought it was a pretty interesting discussion. But I think too for me, it's like you're coming in and you're maybe used to like a certain amount of, let's just say, access. But then when you get to the tour, like from what I'm getting, correct me if I'm wrong, but that was my experience too, is it feels very restrictive. And you're kind of like, wait a minute, why can't I just go over and talk to these people? So much of it now is like the PR is insane. The control is insane.
It's not real.
And it's always been a little bit insane, but now I feel like it's just at a different level.
Yeah.
You can't go anywhere. And I think in some ways they've used COVID
They did. That is absolutely
in a very interesting way.
They basically have used it to just cut out the written press in general because they don't think it's like the thing is that the ASO is like so hit and miss, and sometimes the ASO is like they invited me to go to Tour of Oman, for example, and they're really good with like Arctic Race of Norway, Paris Tour, La Vuelta even, which is why the Vuelta media restrictions were insane. Like, why would you do this at the Vuelta where like literally 8 journalists go?
Right.
Like, and I was like, I can kind of understand it with the tour. Like, I don't approve of it, but I can kind of understand it because the tour is a media product in and of itself. But like Giro, Vuelta, Paris-Nice, Dauphiné, any of these races, like there is no need to restrict access like this. Like, these are how like the stories for the Grand Tours are wound up. Like, I think that like cycling is really dumb and they don't think that they need the written press anymore. And it's like, who is going to tell the long form stories about your riders, about their journeys, about their lives? Because we're the only ones who give a shit. No offense.
It's a very strange sport. Unlike some others, I haven't done journalism in other sports, but I saw that. I think John Wilcoxon tweeted something. I don't know if it was in a thread that you were in, but
It was in my thread, I think.
he was basically like, it was something like, I remember going to like a hotel, walking into the lobby, asking where Phil Anderson's room is or Le Mans' room, going
Le Mans
up there
room.
and then sitting on the bed opposite. And just like doing the interview.
I would cut off my left foot to be able to do that.
I mean,
Yeah,
can you imagine?
I mean that's
I would personally maim myself being able to. And it's like, the thing is, like, that's what I want to do. Like, I like being close with writers so that they can tell me things that they feel. And that makes me able to write things that are different than what other people write.
With no PR person sitting there like, you can do this, you can do that.
It's like, it's possible for me to craft a narrative around a writer because they're an interesting person.
Well,
And even when they're not interesting, I can make them interesting.
and you know this, we all know this, but a lot of times the best parts of the story are the little tiny moments.
Little
where,
details.
My girlfriend calls it the kind of like an aha moment. She has a term for it, but it's okay. The interview's done. Oh, by the way, and then it's like, then you get this little interesting anecdote, or this little revelation, which actually is way more interesting than everything you talked about
Exactly.
previously. So that's kind of nuts. And I was just going to say too, my second tour was when Sky had the big Death Star, as they called the bus back then.
Big time.
And they were kind of at their peak, but not in the best way. Like they were crushing the tour.
They were
Obviously, Froome
totally
came
arrogant.
after. It was, Froome was battling with Wiggins. There was all that story. But then, like, you couldn't go anywhere near it. And that, for me, really symbolized this kind of lack of access. It's...
And it's like sometimes, like
I don't miss covering the tour.
after the tour, I was like, I really almost wanted to quit. I was like, what am I even doing here? This is pathetic. If like this is what I'm gonna have to go through, and I run my own publication, and like they invite my publication because it's good, and because like they know that I'm going to give mostly favorable. Like I'm here to tell the stories of cycling. And to do that in an experiential way. And they mostly know me for my work doing cycling as creative nonfiction, which was a necessity because I didn't have access. Before I had access, I had to rely on creative nonfiction as a structure to write about cycling.
Well, I wanted to actually get into a little bit of that because I think that's really interesting too. So you're referring to your Substack, right?
Yes.
And so that is really interesting to me. I wanted to talk a little bit about the writing side of it. So you're doing freelance for various titles, and that's ongoing, right?
Yes.
Okay. And then you started the Substack, which I recently subscribed to.
Thank you.
And I had seen free versions of it before, let's say. And I mean, you can really write. And so
Thank you.
obviously you came to cycling already writing a lot.
Yeah, I'd been a writer for 6 years.
Where did you, I just wanted to talk about writing for a little bit, but where did you kind of learn to write?
That's an interesting question. I started writing when I was in high school or middle school. I started writing in middle school, and when I was in high school, I won some awards for short fiction.
Nice.
I went to school for music because I was still more talented. I thought I was more talented as a violinist and as a composer than I was at writing. This was not true. This was a blatant falsity, but I don't think I would have been any better off either way. I mean, I ended up fine. But I'd been a writer. I was a habitual paper writer when I was in undergrad and also in graduate school. And I had various like different avenues for writing. So of course, when I was like in middle school, it was like fanfiction.net. And when I was in high school, I was writing short fiction. And then when I was in college, I was writing academic papers and also just private essays. And then when my blog went viral, obviously I became like an essayist and also like a kind of visual humor person. And so it was just adapting different types of writing. I'm also a published poet. And so it was, yeah. So when I was mostly known as an essayist for a long time.
Okay.
And then when I started writing about cycling, because I wanted to write narratively. And also I was tired of writing about buildings and about architects who I didn't like, and I wanted to write about human beings, and I wanted to write about feelings and emotions and events, which are kind of barred from criticism. Not that you can't interpolate those things into criticism. But really, a critical essay is a straight format essay. And in fact, I write a lot of those for cycling now. Like the one I wrote today is not a narrative essay at all. It is purely a critical essay. But the thing is adapting. I wanted to write narratively, and I was inspired to write narratively because I had read the book The Writer.
Oh.
And
Tim
Crabbe.
Tim Crabbe.
And the better book is The Cyclist in His Shadow.
Oh, you think it's better than...
It's better.
I haven't read the latter, The Shadow.
It's better.
But I've read The Rider like 3 times.
The Rider is so good, but The Cyclist in a Shadow is like...
What's crazy about The Rider is that's translated from the Dutch.
Yeah, and it's
so
still
can
the
you
best
imagine?
ever.
Can you imagine how good it is in Dutch?
Yeah, and The Cyclist in a Shadow is translated from French by Francois Tomazeau of the Cycling Podcast.
I have to. Okay, I have to.
Really?
Yeah.
So we can't cover everything in this podcast, but I did want to just. So you came and you talked about your blog going viral a couple of times. Is that the McMansion?
Yeah,
Hell?
McMansion Hell.
Okay, so that's kind of like where you got. Well, like you said, you went viral.
Yeah, D- internet fame.
And then you ended up doing a TED Talk.
Yeah, I had a TED Talk, and then I also was a columnist at various places.
Nice.
So I had my career really kind of peaked in 2020, and I'm having an existential crisis about it at the moment.
Okay.
But yeah, I don't
You're
know.
having a crisis now?
Yeah, why not? I had a crisis because they wouldn't let me talk to whoever in the Tour de France. I was like, I don't want to do this anymore.
No, it's hard. You know what?
It's like, do I want to be a cycling journalist? Yes. Do I want to go to the Tour? Probably not. I mean, the thing that was crazy is that they wouldn't let you, like, they weren't letting the written press into the finish line zone during the Vuelta, which is insane. The Vuelta is a minor race. Like, it really does need publicity.
Mm-hmm.
The Tour is a circus. I get that. I understand that. The Vuelta is like, everyone is checked out by the time the Vuelta runs around. It's like, okay, like, the Tour to, like, World Championships is a void. And even World Championships, Lombardia, like, Amelia, that kind of era is like, it's like only diehards are really into that.
Yeah.
After
Right.
the tour is over, everyone pretty much checks out.
Yep.
Maybe they turn into world championships. I don't know.
Maybe, yeah.
But like the Vuelta does need publicity. When I was at the Vuelta, sometimes there was as few as like 20 members of the press any other day. And the tour, there's like hundreds. And so,
Tour can be like 600.
yeah, exactly.
The press rooms are insane. They're
huge. They're like in full
They are
schools.
massive. It's like going to like a show. It's like, I don't know, going to like the Riviera. It's
Really?
even
horrible.
bigger sometimes. So your blog went viral.
Yes, sorry.
And you really, so that was just your own blog.
Yes.
So you were writing posts and you really tapped into something. You hit kind of a nerve.
Yeah.
Which is still active, right?
Yeah. I
that's
still
McMansion Hell,
I
right?
still do that that's where most of my income comes from, actually, because it's monetized through Patreon.
McMansion Hell, right?
So you have people who donate
Yes.
regularly to you. You mentioned this previously as well. That's really cool. Do you kind of enjoy being like one foot in one world and one in the other, or?
Yeah, because otherwise I think I would have a crisis all the time if I didn't have something to fall back on, you know?
Yeah.
I took a lot of risks becoming a cycling journalist. And I think that having an independent source of income, like, and having something to fall back on makes me like a better critic of cycling. Like, for example, this is what I was getting to when I was like calling out on social media, which you mentioned before, like the lack of access to the written press, and like other people joined in, like Ed Pickering, who's the editor-in-chief of Rouleur, Haley Fretz, who's the editor-in-chief of
Joe Lindsay,
Joe Lindsay, like
the who's who.
yeah, the who's who, and like Anne Brackman, who is a freelance journalist who was Belgian, she was the first one to really make a stink. She made a stink actually in the private ASO communications as well, and that's how I found out about it. And so, like, when I saw that she was like, that she had replied to the ASO's message about like separating the rights holders from the written press, I was on my bike when I got that text, and I like biked home. I was on Elston going like 20 miles an hour, just like, I was like, I need to tweet right now. I'm like running red lights. I need to tweet.
That's so funny.
Drafting cars. I need to tweet.
Crazy, but funny.
But after I tweeted that, and after a bunch of people joined me, and we made a big stink about it and caused a lot of Twitter drama, like the ASO has let in the written press to the finish line now.
Wow.
Except for today, where no one was allowed because the roads were too narrow.
Yeah. Wow. Well, that's amazing. That's journalism having some effect.
I think the thing is that a lot of people are afraid that they're going to lose what little progress they've had.
Mm-hmm.
But if I lose the progress that I've made, I'm like kind of fine with that because I can just go back to being an architecture critic. It's not the end of the world for me. And so I have no problem picking a fight worth picking.
And I think there's different ways around it too. If that, like if that door were to close, let's say ASO, blacklisted you or something.
I've been blacklisted, but not by ASO.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there are ways for you to attack it and to write about this sport and keep it very interesting. I think it just opens a different door for you and a different approach.
Yeah, I mean,
because I think people would be really interested in hearing that, and I think there's plenty of people that would want to talk to you about what's going on there. But cycling in general, because I'm coming from, I've seen that racing side, and I've been, very close to it at different times in my life, and now I'm on the retail side of bicycles and owning a bike shop. It's the whole thing. Anything bicycle has always been poorly run. It's
it's kind of funny, yeah.
It's all like a kind of a make-believe sport. It's
true. I compared it. So like if the NBA is capitalism, right?
Yeah.
Like American capitalism.
Yeah.
Cycling is still like in feudalism.
It's different
Sometimes it's
people.
embarrassing actually because people come
deeply
from other worlds, let's say, and
Well,
they're
yeah.
kind of like, wait, how does this work? Like, what do you do?
Why is it
Yeah.
so fucked?
And you're
Yeah.
just like, well, yeah. So this family, this French family, they own the. Okay,
Yeah,
No, yeah. No,
It's
no.
feudalism.
they're
Yeah.
like
Some
okay.
family, a royal French family owns.
And yet
And
they're
we're all
in
their
cahoots
serfs.
with the government.
Yeah.
And the government gives them all this leeway to do X, Y, and Z. And
And
the
I'm
president shows up and
Nowhere in the cycling.
It's
No,
so
nowhere
bizarre.
in cycling. Not at any level, except for the riders. Are they the best of the world at what they do?
No.
Like nowhere in cycling. Not the best engineers.
No.
Not it's usually the people that work the cheapest, the people that work for a bicycle, the people that don't want to have a real life and want to work in the bike world.
Yeah.
And willing to take less for it.
There's a lot of exploitation.
Yeah, there is, and that's at every level, and that's at in every level of the sport, of manufacturing. It's one of these things where, and I don't know that. I know cycling. I don't know if this happens in other sports, but in cycling, it's the worst because it's just if you're happy to work for a jersey and shorts, they'll put you to work.
Oh yeah.
I mean, you take a jersey and shorts, they'll in a helmet and maybe a team bike. All of a sudden, you're the PR. You're the assistant PR director of a
The
team.
press officers, they get paid like $100,000 a year. I mean, like those are cushy jobs. Why do you think a lot of ex-journalists take them?
but I don't know. I don't know if I'd want that job. They're on a plane a lot.
They're
They're
it's a
traveling.
brutal
They're
job.
away from
Yeah.
home a lot. Like
They have
I
to
know the
also-
EF one, Matt Bowden, and
Yeah, Matt Bowden is like
he's
shared a little
he's
bit.
he's got to leave the kids. He's got young kids now. He's got to go.
He was
do
a
this
great
stuff.
journalist.
Oh,
It
he was
like-
fantastic.
It was kind of honestly, it was kind of sad that he went to PR.
I met him when he was a journalist at the USA Pro Cycling Challenge, aka Tour of Colorado. He was writing for Velo News at the time.
Yeah, he was a Velo News guy.
We've been friends since. And he's a damn good press officer too.
He's
but
a really good press
He's super
officer.
talented. But yeah, great writer, great voice. Kind of reminds me of you in some ways.
Yeah,
has that
yeah.
voice. But to just finish the writing part, because I was really curious, what's your writing process?
That's really interesting. So, for example, it depends on what I'm doing.
Let's say it's a Substack, and you want to
it's a Substack.
and you want to put a little extra in, like it's a really important piece for you personally, as opposed to something that's a little bit more,
Abstract or when I would like do race reports.
yeah.
So when I start writing, so when I watch the race, I take notes so I can remember what's happening, and I'll take notes on like what I'm thinking about or whatever, and so I'll like read over the notes. I don't write after every stage. I usually write like when it's a big mountain stage, I'll write, or if something like really inspirational happens or whatever. But like unless I'm writing a race report, I don't write after every stage. I like to see sometimes how the narrative arc of the race ends. So for example, on stage 6 of this Vuelta in 2022, Jay Vine wins in the fog, and Roglic and Almeida and Sivakov and a bunch of other and Simon Yates and a bunch of other guys are dropped, whereas Remco Evenepoel and Enric Mas are ahead by a minute. And then I was like, okay, but I'm gonna wait, and this is like a really epic stage. I'm gonna wait though and see, instead of writing like a big dramatic thing of this stage, I'm gonna wait and see what happens next, because there's another medium mountain stage and then another high mountain stage after that. And so that was just an instinct, like, because usually I would just write a kind of narrative thing after a big stage like that. But I was really curious as to whether or not Roglic had really cracked. And I think he just had a bad day because it was raining. It was really horrible out. He doesn't do well in the rain. Fog, fine, but the rain, not really. And so, but by the end of this triangle of stages, so there's one high mountain stage, medium mountain stage, which is a breakaway stage, and then another high mountain stage where Jay Vine wins again. I was going to originally write about something that was, okay, like what happened in this trio of mountain stages, but I started thinking more about Jay Vine because he had won 2 of them. And I started to think about how we talk about Jay Vine. And this is something I'm like really interested in, and how we talk about writers and how we talk about narratives in the sport. Like that comes from my criticism side, where it's like, okay, I want to write about what other people are writing about or saying, and not so much about the race itself. Sometimes I take this approach, and sometimes I do just straight narrative, what happened, but in a more artistic way, I guess. I don't know how to say it otherwise. But but I was thinking about how I was really unhappy with how the commentators were always saying that, like, Jay Vine he got to the World Tour, Alpecin's not quite World Tour yet, but they will be next year, through the Zwift Academy. And I was like, okay, first of all, every time you say this, and it's every time you mention this man, you are giving Zwift free advertising, which, like, as a journalist, like, that doesn't sit right with me in the first place. Second of all, Jay Vine was a continental level. He was a continental level rider before he won Zwift Academy. It wasn't like he was some rando in his basement. And this is really what the narrative paints him as, is an amateur rando in his basement who's just really good and he won Zwift Academy. That's not true. He was training in a conventional way. He was riding for a continental team that was like 8th best in his region or something. I mean, they weren't like extraordinary, but he had a continental, so he had access to coaches, he had access to good bikes and kit and all this other stuff. They don't pay very well.
High level racer.
Yeah, he was a really high level, like, amateur or semi-professional racer. It wasn't like he was a rando.
He didn't just come out of his basement.
No, he didn't come out of his
Eating cheeseburgers. Oh, what's this? Bicycle?
his pain cave or whatever.
Yeah.
He wasn't like me Zwifting at like 8 p.m., sweating like a dog with my box fan. You know, he wasn't like that. I mean, he was a high-level, competent rider, and if you were familiar with the Australian racing scene, you would have known that there were several, like, kind of arcs of local racing that were happening that he was a factor in. Like, it was definitely true that he was a contender. It's just that he would have taken a little bit longer to get to the world tour because he was from, like, a region of Australia that was a little bit underserved. He was also, like, at his sort of peak as an amateur / semi-professional / continental rider, whatever you want to call it, during the pandemic, which was really devastating for Australian riders because they couldn't race in Europe.
Right.
And so because of their pandemic restrictions. So if you are him in 2020, high-level rider, very good climber, has been on Zwift forever because it's like there's the only thing to do because the Australian pandemic guidelines were so strict.
Yeah.
It was like...
Technical difficulty here. Give me a second.
Thanks for listening to the Bike Shop Society podcast. If you'd like to get in touch with us, email us at mail@bikeshopsociety.com. If you're on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, you can look us up at Bike Shop Society. That's it. Get in touch with us. We'd love to hear from you. Now, back to the show. Goodbye.
Yeah, okay. Okay, that's good.
Jay Vine.
Jay Vine, like, it's funny to me because for Jay Vine...
You know, he went through the Zwift Academy.
Yeah, he went through. Yeah, I know. It wasn't for him in that situation.
Yeah.
Zwift Academy was a pretty good gamble.
Yeah.
Like, he could make it to the World Tour sooner than he normally would going through the conventional continental system. The pandemic had totally shut off Australia from the rest of the world in terms of cycling. It was a risk he was willing to take. But we should really look at Zwift Academy more as like the Tour de l'Avenir or as like a kind of a stand-in for a conventional feeder team for under 23s than as like this new technological thing. And so, like, I just was urging in my essay, I was like really pissed because this guy won 2 stages at the Vuelta a España. He's a top level climber. He was climbing better than some of the best climbers in the world.
Right.
And like all you can talk about is Zwift.
Yeah.
All you're doing is giving this company free advertising. It's like, no, we have to think about what we say. And so like that essay took a critical approach.
I do have to say, super killer smart on Zwift's part, whoever's doing these things there. But
Genius.
Yeah, total genius.
But aren't those just lazy journalists? I mean, the people that are just kind of sucking, just kind of buying into that, right? They're
narrative,
just repeating.
They're just repeating
They're
what they got
repeating
in
the
a
press release, right? I mean, that's it. They're just writing the press release and not digging a little deeper.
Yeah,
You bothered to dig.
I like to dig. I mean, also the thing is when I write, sometimes I think about what are people not doing. In fact, I don't even care most of the time what people are doing.
Right.
And so, like, for example, when I write a narrative piece or I want to take like a sort of overarching theme. So, for example, I wrote a couple of days ago about Sam Bennett and Roglic also like coming into their own at the Vuelta. I mean, Roglic cracked a couple of days later, but you know, he's back now. He's fine. He just had a bad day in the rain. But it was... The Vuelta offers something. I was like, okay, so I started with this idea. The Vuelta offers something different that allows like these certain types of individuals to come back before the start of the next season. And so I was like, what is it about the Vuelta? And so it became a way of like, okay, so I have this theme. What is it about the Vuelta that is so liberating to a certain type of cyclist that they like it is constantly like the site for so many individual comebacks? So I had this idea, this question, and then I was like, okay, as a writer, how do I integrate this with a race report in like the most kind of loose way, not like a detail by detail. Because by this point, by the time I'm writing It's America Time, the race is over. The race reports have been written.
You're going like bigger picture,
Yeah, exactly. And also just
not pointillism.
Yeah, I take also a kind of, I'm very inspired by things like poetry or by literature, and so integrating those into pieces. And so by the time you get done, it's like, okay, you have a question that's asked that you've answered with a race report, that you've turned into kind of like a broader scheme, general statement about the Vuelta that can turn into kind of almost like an elegy about the Vuelta. And then you have, some literary references sprinkled in there.
Some of the posts kind of remind me of like what I read on the New Yorker, like .com, like website.
That's so funny because the New Yorker has snubbed me for my entire professional life.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Maybe you could put a good word in.
I know David Remnick a little bit. Yeah.
I wrote an essay about how David Remnick's essay from like 1983 about the Jersey Turnpike was bad, and I think that's why I'm not allowed at the New Yorker.
Oh, no.
Oh, man.
I don't really know him, but I did have a couple emails with him. But no, so that's really interesting. I like that, the way you described your writing process. Yeah, I mean, it's a pleasure to read.
Thank you.
Do you have an editor? Do you just write and self-edit? Like, I'm just curious because it comes off like just like it's.
Are you offering,
it's
Danny?
a pretty high level. No. I am an editor, so I'm just curious. I've worked with obviously a lot of writers, and
I self-edit on Derailleur, and I desperately need an editor. Sometimes
making connections.
I sometimes send things when I write for myself. Like I feel like I'm a terrible editor. When I edit for other people, I feel like I'm a little bit better.
Well, one of the things, and I'm not on it, so you're the person to really ask. But one of the things that I think is interesting about Substack is, and I think Rogan talked about this because he had the CEO of Substack on like a week ago. What's his last name? Best or something?
Yeah, something like that.
Anyway, so he was kind of talking about this, and it's like Substack is, I mean, it's a blog in a way.
Yeah, that's the thing is I was a blogger before, so this is the natural kind of tendency. Admittedly, I got on Substack a little late for the Substack craze, but it was, for me, it was the easiest way to monetize my thoughts.
And it's like, but my main point I was trying to make, and I'm not doing a great job of it, it's just that you don't have a lot of like editors and other stuff coming between you and your audience. It's just like, it is a blog. It's a paid blog. You can subscribe if you want, right? It's optional, I think.
Yes, it is optional.
But for me, that's like kind of cool and interesting. Do you, as a writer, like, have you looked back at the pieces you've written? Like you recently wrote a really big piece on Pogacar for bicycling, which was published during the tour, right? And we haven't even talked about your Slovenia connections.
Oh yeah, that's like a major part of my life.
Which is probably a whole separate podcast. But my question though is, looking back at the stuff that is published on bicycling, and I think they have some pretty strong editors there and other places. When you look at that stuff versus let's say your stronger pieces on Derailleur, like, do you see great differences? Do you see the editing or the writing and the conversation? I just use editing in a very general sense, not necessarily line editing, but do you see like a different, do you get like a different sense of, I don't know, like, are you looking at these pieces differently?
Yeah, definitely. Big time. My editor at Bicycling is Leah Flickinger, and she was the one who onboarded me back in October of 2020. So she was the first person to ever read my cycling writing because I originally posted the essay on Medium, and then they republished it in Bicycling about Roglic losing the Tour de France and why I was sad. And
you wrote that on Medium.
Yeah, and then it was republished in Bicycling like a day later. And so she was the one who brought me into cycling journalism. And she was the one who was like, we want you to do a profile. I had never done a profile before. I had done obituaries, which is the closest thing. But I had never done a profile. And so she was like, who do you want to profile? And at the time, actually, I wanted to profile Tom Dumoulin. Because I thought he was like sensitive and
fascinating
fascinating guy, and like but then two things happened. One, he like quit cycling
twice
for the first time, and then also like before I can even send the email being like I want to profile Dumoulin, she was like, can you profile Roglic? And I was terrified of Roglic because I knew that Roglic was like bad with the press, and also he was at the time like very much my hero.
He's bad with the press? I find that a little surprising.
No. Well, like he was a notoriously difficult interview.
In what way?
In any kind of intimate way. Like he could be funny sometimes, but like actually getting to know him or getting to see like who he really was almost impossible.
Like he would be curt with people?
He was very curt. He was very shy in interviews. He didn't like to do them.
Okay.
Eventually,
tell us about your first encounter with him.
It was terrible. But wait, to answer your question, like, yes, those editors, they have like years of editorial experience and like these pieces are long form. So they're like greater than 2,000 words and they can just cut the fat immediately and they know exactly how to trim. And I don't know how to do that. And I'm trying to learn that skill set. So when I write for bicycling, especially, it's different than when I write for Derailleur or even when I write for Velo News or Roulette or any of these other, like bicycling, their editorial team is much more involved in the creative process. And they also have fact checkers, which is unique in the cycling industry. And so when I write my pieces for them, I'm very involved with like making sure the fact checking process is as smooth as possible.
I was at bicycling, I think when Leah came on staff, if I'm not mistaken. And right away I could just tell like she's a very talented editor. But that's really cool.
But anyways, back to Roglic. This was terrible. So like you have to
Wait, this is your first time meeting him?
Okay, so like first of all, this was I agonized for months over how to talk to Roglic because he was my hero. Like you have to understand, like when I was depressed, I would think about Roglic like winning the 2020 Vuelta after losing the Tour de France or something. And I would just, he was my hero. And so, you should never meet your heroes.
I was just thinking of that when you said that.
So I wasn't quite a journalist at that point. Like I was a writer, but I hadn't yet like adopted like journalism as an identity and as like a practice.
Like standards and...
Yes, exactly. I was just like someone freelance writing about cycling. It was not the same thing as being a journalist. And so, like, because when you're a journalist, you have to kill your inner fan. And I'll talk about that a little later because I think that's the most interesting thing about that switch. But at the time, I was still a fan. And I was very kind to Jumbo Visma at any given point. And I still consider myself to be kind to them, even though I asked Jonas Vingegaard the doping question in the press conference. But that's because all us young people draw straws, basically, to do it. Anyways, we'll
get to that.
Yeah, we'll get to that. But the whole thing was when so first of all, they gave me a phone call. Not a Zoom call, just a phone call, because he was in training camp in Tenerife. And so, first of all, like, the reception there is terrible. He has a Slovenian phone number. So they gave me his phone number, and they're like, call him. And I was like, oh my God, I have his phone number. And so, it's like February. I didn't sleep the night before at all. The Giro was on. This was stage 4 of the Giro when 2020 Giro where Joe Dombrowski won. And that was later. This was in February. And so in February, it was like there was 2 feet of snow outside. I couldn't actually leave my house because we were snowed in. And so I called him and I hadn't slept at all the night before at all, like 0 hours of sleep. I was so anxious. I had agonized over the questions and I had these overwrought questions like, what does it mean to be a father? Like this was so cringe. And so I was like, I'm going to ask him questions no one has ever asked. And that is not the way to think about being a journalist. Like that's not how it is. And so I was like, I called him. And so Roglic had been on his time trial bike for like 3 hours.
Ouch.
And then he was in his like second or third hour of media interviews that day. So he was ready to pretty much kill himself. He was just completely dead tired. He was miserable. He was short. He didn't say anything interesting or good.
And you're like, what's it like to be a father?
And he was like, I'm really tired.
He was
like, oh, I don't get any sleep, but it's pretty beautiful. He knows like 3 words at that point, and like beautiful was one of them. His English is like much better.
That's a good one to know.
But it was so funny. Like I was devastated. I was like, I'm the worst ever. I'm gonna I went on Zwift immediately after and rode my bike so hard on Zwift just to get the cortisol out of my system that I like went to the bathroom and threw up, and then I like laid in bed listening to the National and cried.
Oh God,
I was
that's
like,
a
so
lot.
I thought
Have you written about this?
I thought I had like fucked up the interview of my life. And not only that, but like this person I had as a hero hated me and thought I was annoying and asked bad questions because I ran out of questions because I was like, okay, I have 5 questions. It's a 30-minute interview. Like that should be enough. And he answered them in like 2-word answers. And I was like, then I asked him, I was like, what do you think about the Cervelo bikes? And he was like, oh, we'll see you in the races. And I was like, I'm going to kill myself. Like,
Oh my God. It sounds traumatic.
it was terrible. And so I was like, wow, I really don't want to write that Roglic is a dick. And also I hate cycling now. And I like want to go into a cave and die. And so I was like, eventually I like called my editor in a frenzy. I was like, yeah, he said some good stuff. Like one time he struggled. And he told me a little bit about that. And anyways,
This
like,
is the best story I've ever heard.
he was kind of terrible. Oh, so bad.
Well, at least you didn't talk about the ski jumping.
No, I did ask him about this.
Oh, you did?
Yeah. But like I asked him in a way that he was like, whatever. He's like, yeah, I just knew I wasn't going to win the Olympics, and so I quit. And then it was so funny. So I was like, okay, so I didn't get jack shit out of this interview. All of my secret feminine tricks or whatever. I had this jackass idea that he was going to open up to me because I was like, I was going to ask the questions in a way better than anyone had ever. And I had never ever asked the questions in the first place to anyone. So how was I supposed to know? It was just completely like fan fiction way of thinking about doing the job.
Oh my God, I can relate. I mean, I've had similar experiences where I would fantasize basically about the interview I was going to do.
Yeah, so
and I was
true.
going through all these scenarios with it. Like, I'm going to talk to this guy and I'm going to talk to this guy. And I play it through my head. And sometimes it wouldn't be the close or the same thing, but it would be like really good. I'm like, wow, that worked out great. And other times it was just the biggest reality slap because it would just turn out to be like the most
worst
boring,
ever.
uninteresting interview, very curt, like monosyllabic, one sentence kind of answers.
Well,
and you're like, okay, thanks.
It's like time to kill myself. No.
And did you ever relate this story to him afterwards? Now that you know him a little
he
bit?
knows about it because he read the profile, I think. But anyways, like he retweeted it.
Oh, that's cool.
One of his very few ever retweets.
Oh, wow.
It's the only time he's ever retweeted a journalist writing about him, like an English speaking journalist. Slovenian, that's different.
That's something.
But anyway, so the second I was like, I told my editor, I was like, I need a second interview. I fucked this up. And at that point I was panicking because I have to write this profile about this guy and I don't know actually anything about him from his own words. So I focused then on like, what do I want to know about this guy that he has not told anyone? And the things I wanted to know was like, he went to college, but no one's ever talked about that.
I didn't know that.
He went to college, and I wanted to know about like.
Did he graduate with a degree?
No, he never graduated. He was in his 5th year. He was an organization and management student, which is basically the most sports. Is apparently a sports guy kind of major.
Mm-hmm.
But he said like, yeah, I want to finish someday. Anyways, like the second interview we had, it was during the Giro, and this was during stage 4 of the Giro when Joe Dombrowski won. And we both had the Giro on in the background. And so we were watching the Giro. He's in Spain. He's in like Sierra Nevada or something. I don't remember. But he's in Spain at training camp. And he's like sunburnt to shit. He's wearing his trucker hat. He's in his hotel room. And he is having a good old time. And so, I mean, he's got like his exercise endorphins. And he was great.
That's
it was
so cool.
It was still one of the best interviews I've ever done. And he was.
What year was that? Sorry.
This was in 2021.
Okay.
This was in May of 2021. And so we shot the shit. And I also at the end, like, of course, like this was before I was a journalist. Now I would never do this. But like I was like, look, I thinking about like giving up my career to become a cycling journalist. And I was like, I don't know what, like, I mean, like this is, and he was like, oh, you're quitting ski jumping.
That's good.
I was like, yeah. And he's like, well, you know, like, I wish I could tell you that it would be this super nice sport, but you'd have a really nice, really good time. But you gotta expect this fucking hard sport. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's terrible.
That's a pretty good Roglic.
And he was just like, yeah, this is gonna be really hard and it's gonna suck.
That's cool.
Yeah.
And I didn't believe him until I got to the Tour de France and I realized, no, this is really hard and it's gonna suck.
Sounded like he opened up.
He did, and like we have a good rapport ever since. Like sometimes he just truly busts my balls. Like for example, like he has a rapport with me now where he like kind of knows my shtick, and like he'll always say hi to me. He always makes a point like when he has like a little bit of time and he has time to stop by. He'll like in the Grand Depart in Denmark, I saw him. Because everyone's trying to get him in the Tour this year, and he ended up stopping by to see me.
Nice.
And he was like, one question, and I was like, oh fuck, I have to combine everything I was going to ask into one question. So I did that, and then I was like,
mega question.
I was like, how are and like how was it last year compared to this year, and how are you? And he's like, I'm good, I'm enjoying it. Bye. I was like,
you guys text each other?
no, we do not text each other.
Okay.
No, like it's a very professional, like,
yeah.
like when we see each other, like where he understands that I'm still learning,
Yeah.
and that also that I'm not there to persecute him or something.
Yeah.
But he but he was always really generous towards me. In Grant, when I was at the Vuelta last year, there were many times I could have asked him a bunch of things, but there were a lot of things that people just asked him before, like how was the stage, etc. And so I made a point of like not calling on him unless I needed him. And so at the time I was reporting on the changes in the Slovenian national team. And so I asked him about that. And I didn't really ask him much again after that because I didn't really need to because he had press conferences every day because he was in the red jersey. I didn't need to ask him my own personal questions. And that's a big part of being a journalist is like knowing when you do and do not need to ask questions. But I did need something from him, which was like his views on like this very significant change in Slovenian national team. He was like, oh, shit, huh?
What was the change? I'm not.
It was Andre Houtman, who is a DS at UAE Team Emirates. He was leaving as the director of the Slovenian national team.
Oh, okay.
And like at that point, he was the one who led Roglic to the Olympics. And also like Roglic had worked with Houtman like when he was at Adria and like in this early part of his career. And so, like, they were very familiar with each other. And Andre, as a guy, is, like, a very gentle, very nurturing kind of person. He's a very soft-spoken, like, kind, fatherly kind of figure. And, like, at the time, I didn't know this, but the Slovenian Cycling Federation is, like, a kind of, like, weird political entity, which is that there's basically a weird proxy war going on between UAE Team Emirates and Bahrain Victorious in control for the Slovenian Cycling Federation.
Really?
And it was like very clear that Bahrain was going to take over. They were going to install basically like a puppet president. And because they're actually like, it's funny because like they are a Bahraini team, but like their service course is in Slovenia. Like the staff is Slovenian. The general manager, Milan Ergen, is Slovenian. They had like the most
de facto.
Yeah, it is the de facto Slovenian
like Sky
team.
UK.
Exactly. And so like Roglic, like he I think had like, this is a little bit subjective or like a little bit I'm like inferring things, but every time I've talked to Roglic, he talked about how he had a miserable time at Adria, which was at that point managed by Milan Ergen. And like even after Ergen left, like I don't think Roglic had a good time there. And so like I don't think he wanted people from Adria, which is one of the continental teams in Slovenia, to come into the leadership of the Slovenian Cycling Federation. And I asked him, like, do you know who it's going to be? He's like, yes, but I can't tell you. Like, this is how he is with me sometimes. Like,
Not even off the record?
No, sometimes he's a ball buster. And, like, but sometimes, like, when wherever we're one-on-one, like, I went to Slovenia in May to interview him during his press conference for the cycling podcast. And he immediately is just like, he was like, before we even started recording, he was like, are you going to come back to Slovenia? I said, yes, I'm going to live here in the summer. And he's like, you're going to bring your bike? And I was like, yes. And he's like, you're crazy. And then he was like, here's these climbs you have to do.
Oh, nice.
And he's like, one of these climbs is like by my house. And you'll
Come
know
by for tea.
Yeah, and well, he lives in Monaco, but like his apartment in Slovenia.
Yeah.
And he has a condo there outside of Ljubljana. And he's like, one of those comes by, he's like, you got to go do this, and this. And
That's so cool.
And he was like, oh, you're crazy. I was like, how long are you going to spend in Slovenia? I said, the whole summer. He said, oh, you're crazy, huh? I don't understand you. And and then like we started recording, and then like blah, 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 blah. We started talking about ski jumping because I was interested about like the difference between ski jumping and cycling in terms of funding and access as a young person and stuff like that. And so he... then was like at the end he was just then he starts to tell his like war stories, which he really likes to tell, and he was just like, yeah, I remember when I was at Adria and like we would do these hill climbs and I first started and you know I'd be like really good or whatever, but then you see these like 15-year-old fucking kids going around like, and they would be like wearing these like fucking kids like the little fucking profession, and he's like F.
That's so Euro.
And it was so funny.
People who are non-native
Because
speakers, like swearing is a little different.
Yeah,
It doesn't
the
hit them
fucking
the same
man.
way. The
The
register
fucking-
register is lower.
This is like for the cycling podcast. So before the episode went off, I had to record an interview. I had to record an intro being like, "There's some strong language in this podcast." Because
they're kind of a prestigious
like
family product.
sometimes when you become really familiar with certain people, they get familiar with you.
F-bombs
He could drop all the F-bombs.
Yeah, and so I mean, I don't know what like things are gonna be like for me in the future because I asked Jonas Vingegaard the doping question. I guess that's banned me for life from Jumbo Visma.
You think so? Do you? I mean,
look, the thing is all of us young people are the only ones who ask it.
Could we just do a real quick play-by-play? Like, just tell us, just so everyone's clear, including me, because I think I know, but can you just tell us like what happened?
So, okay, this is the 2022 Tour de France, right? I'm there, and I had a pretty bad time, I'm going to be honest with you. I'm going to fast forward to the press conference. I'm there at the press conference. At this point, I had a book in the works about Slovenian cycling, which died because Pogačar didn't win the Tour de France. I was in a bad mood, but it had nothing to do with the press conference. But I was curious because the whole 3 weeks, no one at any of these press conferences had asked Vingegaard about doping. And when Pogačar was in the leader's jersey last year, every day he got a doping question. And like, I'm sorry, I don't believe that the team that was once Lamprey is any more suspicious than the team that was once Rabobank. No offense, but Jesus Christ.
Right.
Anyways, like, I definitely know that like Eastern European or Southeastern European riders get questions more about doping than riders from Western Europe. It is like a thing I've written about. It's like complete Western chauvinism. It's disgusting and it needs to stop. And so anyways, I was like getting really frustrated that we dealt with nonstop doping accusations last year against Pogačar versus who had like was competing against like nobody because everyone crashed out versus like Vingegaard who had not won anything until like Coppi e Bartoli like 2020 or whatever. And then suddenly was like second best cyclist in the world. And like, but everyone's like, this is totally perfectly fine. I was like, wait a second, this is a little weird because like I've been tracking Pogačar since he was a junior, and he was definitely like had like these incremental rises, whereas Vingegaard really came out of nowhere and was suddenly good. And so like it's kind of weird to me that no one is asking him the same standard questions that are asked every year in this sport to the leader of the Tour de France. Every single year it is like this, but for some reason, because a Dane is in the leader's jersey, no one is asking these questions because it's a nice story that we don't have a Pogačar dynasty or whatever. And that's not just me being salty. It's just like, okay, I just see that some standards apply to some riders, but not to others.
Call it out.
And so I was like, at the press conference, and I was like,
this was the penultimate. This is the second
after
to
the
last
time
day.
trial, yeah. And so I'm sitting here in the press conference, and I know I'm going to ask this question because I have the balls to do it, and also I want to ask it in a specific way, which is that when you ask these kinds of questions, you cannot imply that the person you're asking is guilty. That you have to be very
Like a loaded question.
You have to be very generous and very open with this question because it is a standard question that all riders are expected to answer because this sport has a disgusting history of cheating and violence against riders and teams and whatever.
Were you rehearsing this question?
Oh, I wrote it out verbatim what I was going to ask. And I asked it like this. I said, last year, every stage of the Tour de France, there were questions about Tadej Pogačar's performance, but you haven't been asked those questions. What is it about your performance that makes us trust you, and how would you answer for the performance that you've given? This is a very open, fair,
I think it's a perfect question.
gentle question. And Vingegaard gave a decent answer. He said, first of all, we're clean, classic. And then he was like, we have invested over the last 6 years in Jumbo-Visma in all of these kinds of things like these wind tunnels, these technological advances. We've like done strategy. We've done video replays. And he was just listing all of the things that they do that they believe are different than other teams, which some of which are like more believable than others in terms of, because I know Jumbo-Visma, for example, works with a university in the Netherlands that has like really exclusive wind tunnel access, and that is why they are so good at time trials, besides having a bunch of time trialists. Like, they are very much about this kind of precise optimization. And like, you know, it's not like the technology for bicycling in general has gotten extraordinarily good in the last, you know, we are not riding on 1990s bikes.
No.
These bikes are so fast that it's almost like a Formula One kind of paradigm where like, are the bikes too fast?
You're literally like a 2-3 miles an hour faster, like on
Yeah.
some of these bikes. Like
Exactly.
I've ridden some of them. I'm like,
Yeah,
wow,
absolutely.
They're nuts.
I would normally be doing 18. I'm doing like 21. Like,
Yeah.
Now, do you think his answer? I mean, it seems like it was prepared, right? I mean, he was ready for the question. He had been prepared for this
Media
question.
trained,
Yeah,
yeah.
media trained.
But that's like
Right.
what they do.
Yeah.
That helps take the pressure off of them. But I also think that was just his answer. Because like he's up there, he's won the Tour de France, he's got all this pressure. He could like crack and say something screwed up. Like, I mean, but he is just like Vingegaard. I mean, he's a very
Yeah, you were in the room with him, so
he's a very, I would say, enigmatic person. I can't tell. Like, I also asked him in the same press conference, like, what he likes to do. like, does he listen to music? Like, what is he into? And he was just like, I just like to spend time with my family. He's very much like the kind of guy who like has two modes. He's either riding a bike or he's not riding a bike. And not riding a bike doesn't mean anything except for that he's not riding a bike.
Right.
And so
My question is, did your actual feeling like in the room, and this actually in some ways goes back to what we talked about access for all kinds of journalists, but like when you were in the room sitting there eye to eye with him, like, what'd you feel? Like, did you feel you trusted him? You liked his answer?
I mean, for me, it was like, for a long time, I've had criticisms by other journalists that I was soft on doping because I did narrative writing. And this is never true. This was not true. I was like very intertwined with Bahrain Victorious when the doping raid happened because I was profiling Mohoric and we were texting and all this other stuff. So like I was very involved with that, though I guess it's because I'm a girl and because I write like flowery Substack posts, like I'm just soft on doping. So for me, like it was like, okay, there's gonna come a time in my career where I have to ask this question because I'm a real journalist. And so like I felt like that was the time and I had prepared it. And also I know I had interviewed Vingegaard several times last year before he was in the white jersey, before he was second in the Tour de France. And the first week I'd interviewed him several times because he was a reliable domestique to interview. Like I didn't think of him as second in command or whatever. No one else did. So he is relatively easy to access. And he is a generally pleasant guy. Like I don't think he's a very deep guy, and I don't think that he's a very like he's a cyclist. He lives for cycling. There's nothing else to it. And so I knew that like he was like an even keeled guy. He doesn't get mad. Like I knew that whatever he was going to say was going to be like reasonable, well prepared, and like he was going to say it with his whole chest. And so I wasn't so anxious because he was not a loose cannon of any kind. I wasn't asking Mark Cavendish if he was doping. Like I was really, and I wasn't even asking if he was doping. I was like, why do we trust you?
Right.
That's a different question.
Yes. I thought you worded it perfectly.
I had agonized over the wording for like 3 days because I knew that there was a way to ask these questions that wasn't accusatory. And I don't like putting writers in duress. Like that is not what I like to do. I like to be the kind of person that anyone can open up to me. And that includes like chatting shit or something like that. And so, I mean, I as a woman also in a male dominated field, I wanted to kind of apply a certain, and this is kind of like self-sexism, but I wanted to apply a certain softness to asking it because I felt like it would be answered in good faith if I came at it in good faith, which I did. And when my colleague Johnny Long at Cycling Tips asked Wout van Aert the same question, Van Aert got really mad, and he said, this is a shit question. I'm not going to fucking answer this. He didn't say fucking, but he said, I'm not going to answer this. And then, like, everyone else in the, like, my editor, Ed Pickering, who I was driving with, who was the editor-in-chief at Rouleur, he was like, this is a good question. You have to answer it. And then he finally eventually answered it, but then the press officer had to come to Johnny and, like, smooth things out and stuff like that. And it's just, like, I don't know if, like, the delivery was different because Johnny's a guy, and he's a young guy, and he's, like, a young British guy. And or if it was that Wout was just automatically on edge because Wout is used to the entire Belgian press kissing his feet and he's not used to interrogative questions. And so it's very hard to tell, like, was the problem in the delivery or is the problem the writer has a chip on his shoulder? Like, you don't know what the answer is to that. But the thing is that you've got to be brave. Like, and that's something also I think about Roglic a lot, is like, Roglic is a brave guy. Like, it takes a lot of bravery to lose really horribly and then, like, win again. And it's not just, like, hide under a rock and, like, internalize it and be, like, self-brutalized by it.
I don't know if I should have been, but I was sitting right over here when I opened Twitter. I wasn't really on social that day so much, but I opened it later, and then I saw all the tweets about it and your stuff. But I remember feeling like I was surprised by Wout. I was like, wow, I'm really disappointed by this answer, this
really
non-answer. And I was just like, he seems smart. He seems like a smart guy.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, you should know this question will come at some point. And again, talk about media training. Like, this wasn't like some bizarre, crazy question. And his response, in my opinion, really couldn't have been worse.
Because
It was really terrible.
Yeah.
He's usually been pretty nice. I mean, he doesn't have a reputation as being a real, like, a bad guy.
And he crushed that tour. I mean, he was dropping.
Yeah.
like real
I mean,
climber.
he was
He's
dropping
someone like David
climbers.
Gaudu or something.
Yeah.
You know?
I mean, that one stage where he went solo and then,
That was nuts.
I mean, his sprints, mixing it up in the sprints. And
He was the tour.
yeah, he was the tour. He was.
And
Vingegaard like was efficient and won, and he hedged, you know, and he won. Like, but the tour was well. And anyway, I was very disappointed by his answer, and I have to admit, I was kind of like on the Wout, you know, Kool-Aid. I was like, wow, Wout's like he's amazing. I mean, it's hard not to really like him.
he was one of the first cyclists I was really into, like because
Well, your Substack, I just noticed that's Wout,
that's
isn't
his
it?
Wout's. Yeah, exactly.
That's Wout's
He's,
image
like,
in the Substack
I was really
icon.
like I really
logo.
loved Wout van Aert, like because at the time this was 2020, this rivalry with Van der Poel had really been set in stone, and so I saw Wout almost as a kind of underdog to Van der Poel. And I also like that he was like very handsome. He's very charismatic. I mean, he is handsome.
Yeah.
Like, he's objectively handsome. And like, this is like something that's so funny. It's like, we really should talk more about that. It's like, no, like sex appeal does play a role in
for
cycling.
sure.
And Wout has probably the highest sex appeal
I
of
see it
any
in my
cyclist.
Twitter feeds all the time. And,
Yeah,
you know, people
girls
like,
love him.
yes.
And it's like, the thing is I mean, I was really captured by Wout. And this, for me, was really difficult to see him be an asshole.
Yeah.
I was like, wow, I always had like really great respect for you. And like, this is really hard to see. When you went on Von 2, I thought it was incredible. I was there that day. And it's like, for you to be an asshole like this is like, that's a bad vibe in cycling. And I wrote about this after the tour was over last year because Mohoric had zipped his lips on stage 19 last year.
Yes.
And he did it because he was angry. And I wrote in my reflection on the tour that year, I said, in cycling, you're not allowed to be angry because you look like an asshole. And also because people will just immediately draw parallels to the time when everyone was angry, which was the 1990s/2000s. And the thing is you have to be gracious all the time. And in some ways, that's really not fair. But in other ways, it's like people need to believe in a version of you. And like when that version of you is shattered, like what Wout did at the press conference, because that definitely shattered Wout's version of himself in me, the narrative journalist.
Same here.
I was really upset, and I was like, "This sucks." Like this was like this person was foundational in my interest in the sport, especially also in cyclocross.
Do you think he would love to take that back, or do you think he's indifferent? Or
Do you think it was a bad day, maybe?
I don't
Just
know.
a-
I
just
think
a
that
moment.
Wout, honestly, he had won that day. He won the time trial that day. I think that Wout.
he did?
I think Wout needs. No offense. I think Wout needs to be taken down a peg. Like, I think that Wout had gotten a little bit arrogant, and arrogance doesn't sit right with a cyclist. Like, I mean,
Well, cycling has a lot of arrogance.
it
that's for
does,
sure.
but like, the thing is like, Wout was always thematically balanced with Van der Poel.
Yeah, well, I knew them from cyclocross, so I've been watching cyclocross for 20 years. All the really bad pirated feeds, like getting up,
Classic.
watching really rando races,
Dude,
and
I have to
like
watch flow bikes. It's terrible.
construction fields, whatever. So I always remembered him, and it was like, oh, it's like this little kid, and there's Van der Poel, and they got this cool rivalry. I was very, very disappointed with that. Not sure what to make of it. I thought it was excellent that you asked that question. You were kind of like a version of Paul Kimmage. I remember when Kimmage asked Armstrong that question at Tour California, and I remember the wording. He said, "What is it about these dopers that you admire so much?" I remember that specific wording, and I thought that was kind of genius. Like, what do you admire about them? Because who was it Basso?
Yeah,
I think was
Ivan Basso, yeah.
getting a lot of heat and all this kind of stuff. So kudos to you. I mean, I think you did a great thing. And these questions, I mean, that's kind of the meta surprise for me is like, don't you expect this question?
I
Like,
know.
Yeah,
you're winning
especially at that
on
level.
Von 2.
Yeah,
You're winning sprint stages. You're
Yeah.
winning time trials.
Yeah, that is an
You're
insane
dropping the
performance. That is
peloton
like an Eddie Merckx
single-handedly.
performance. Like,
yeah.
You're walking on water, man.
dude, yeah, exactly. It's like all you need to do is be gracious when people ask you the hard questions, and everyone just fucking forgets.
Yep.
Like the second you start pushing back, then it becomes suspicious.
You're like, oh yeah.
There is like 100 billion years of cycling history to corroborate this. But also, like, I just don't think that people understand the role of the press. Like, I mean, I'm here to tell the best stories in cycling. I'm here because I love cycling, and there are some cyclists I love. Like, I mean, I just like want nothing but the best for these people. I don't want them to be exploited. I don't want them to suffer. I don't want anything bad to happen to them.
Right.
Like, I don't understand this idea that like the press is there to just create drama. It's like cycling creates its own drama. It does need the press to be able to export that drama to the rest of the world, but it creates its own drama. Like, we don't create drama. The
It's
drama is
drama-laden.
simply there. And
Yep.
like for me, like there are some cyclists that like will always be really core to who I am as a journalist. Roglic, Mohoric, Gino Mater, Pogačar, like these are like the cyclists that like when I'm 100 years old or whatever, or like at least when I'm about to retire, I will still think fondly of all of them. It doesn't matter if they're all busted in EPO scandals. I don't even care. Like these were the men who made me a journalist.
Well, yeah, you look at the Lance era, you know.
Yeah, before that. I mean, the guys that we grew up with, Danny,
Yeah.
that, those guys were all, say what you will, but that was the doping era.
A lot of them
And-
were.
Yeah. And
Not all, but most.
Yeah, all those guys that I loved.
I love Marco Pantani.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I mean, right? I mean,
Well, then it gets, and
The 90s gets weird.
yeah, we'll talk about it some other time, but, then you get into like, why are some dopers liked more than others? It's
That's a
personality.
fascinating
It
question.
totally is. That's actually, for me, one of the most interesting.
Like Bjarne Riis was banned from the Grand Depart in Copenhagen because he was a jerk when he was doping.
He was kind of a prick.
Pantani is like his name is still written on the road in every Grand Tour. It doesn't matter where you are.
And that's how it's gone. And I remember when I was doing more like cycling journalism stuff, people are always like, just like lay people off the street, because everyone knows the Tour and Lance and all that. And I remember people, why do people hate Lance? Why do they like this guy? He doped too. I'm like,
Lance was an asshole.
I know. It's like he was out to ruin people's lives.
He really was. Like
and there were some,
like it's on the record. That's not a subjective criticism. Like
and having been on the ground, like with and among a lot of them.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of them did it, and they were afraid of what they were doing.
Yeah.
Like the science had not been.
They were scared shitless.
they were scared
They're going to
shitless.
die on a
They
slab
wanna die.
Yeah,
with a blood transfusion in Girona or wherever.
and they were kids, and they had dropped out. A lot of
dropped
them,
out of high school.
they drop out of high school. They drop out of school when they're 15 years old. That's all they know.
That's it.
And that's the only thing they got. Otherwise, they go back to work at a factory or for their parents' business or whatever it is. I mean,
Car dealership.
with no education, and so they do what they need to do. It was never with a lot of, there wasn't bravado about it or bragging about it. It was just
it was much more mundane than we want to kind of think. It was much more like perfunctory, and it was like
head down.
this
almost.
is this
like
is
you
kind
didn't
of what
talk.
you
The
do.
thing is like
You didn't talk about it.
Yeah.
It was not something that, it was not a point of pride with them. And they weren't, and most of these guys were not trying to even win the race.
No.
They were just
They're
trying to
trying to
keep
live.
They want to
at the top.
hang and do
Yeah.
their role. Do
They
their
just
job.
wanted to hold their position.
Have
in
you
the
read
team.
The Secret Race?
yeah.
That's one of my favorite books
That book's nuts.
on that era. I
Mm-hmm.
just thought it was such a page turner.
I really loved Andy McGrath's book about Frank Brandenburger.
Oh, that's on my list.
That is like
That's on my list.
I'm in the middle of Daniel Freeb's
Jan
Ulrich,
Ulrich.
but I really think that like Andy McGrath's book on Frank God is Dead about Frank
Yep.
Brandenburger is like it really captures the tragedy of that era.
So those are two books I'm like top of my list.
I mean, I think that I wrote about this for Vela News, but like traditionally, like doping is a material problem. If you fix like the material problems in cycling, like pay, like education, like anything that makes a cyclist's life a little bit better, they have a life outside of cycling, so they don't have to rely on cycling for everything in life aside from their wife. Like then you won't see doping. I don't know if I believe that anymore, but like there is a historical or sociological precedent that does support that idea. I mean, the thing is that I don't think that the sport is clean. I mean, I have no evidence to point otherwise, but the thing is that like the UCI has historically never been on top of everything.
well, yeah. Look at what just happened with.
Bahrain.
No, I was thinking of Nairo.
Yeah, tramadol.
Like that's just an interesting one right there.
Yeah.
It's it's not kosher with some orgs and it's kosher with others.
Yeah, that one's a little bit weird.
It's not exactly what I think you were going at, but like it was another weird one too, because like he is one of the top 10 riders. He's one of the biggest names.
Cycling, yeah.
That was pretty bad.
Somebody once said to me that like the list of unbanned substances is as long as the list of banned substances.
Takes, like, benzodiazepines and stuff, which will
you know, the Vicks inhaler, that's banned.
That's what they allow benzodiazepines, but the Vicks inhaler is banned. Okay,
Vicks inhaler is banned.
Stupid. Okay.
Yeah.
I guess the last thing I'm gonna say, because I have to go soon, because my in-law is sitting with my very silent, awkward husband right now, is that
I hope they're listening.
Yeah, I mean, it's like it's how I got into Slovenia, which was that I profiled Roglic, then at the tour I profiled Mohoric, then like I did the winner's profile of Pogačar when he won in 2021. Then in October of last year, I went to Slovenia to profile Mohoric again, and I was at his house for like 6 hours. I was like, yeah, I'll be done by 1 p.m. I got there at 9 a.m. I was like, yeah, I'll be done at 1 p.m. He didn't let me go till 5.
Ah,
Did it like a full.
Really?
He made us all lunch, and then he also like made pastry, and then he left us me and the photographer in his house alone while he like went to go pick up his car from the mechanic.
hey, you stay here, man.
You stay here and watch my dropper post.
Yeah.
This is gonna be really key later.
He's great. I mean, he is the best interview ever. He's gone through like a really tough time lately, but I mean, and I don't think that these raids have been really good on him because he's really a goody two shoes, and that doesn't mean that I think that he's clean or I don't have any proof that anyone's clean or dirty other than like I have no proof. But like I think that like as a guy who's like the literal and like he's a teacher's pet. And I think that this kind of stuff is really hard on him. But he was, the crazy thing about that interview with Mohoric is that at our lunch table, he was talking about Paris-Roubaix and talking about Milan-San Remo. He was weighing like which one he thought he could win. And he was like talking about like the technological advantages. He said like, yes, you can, I think the technological advantage for Paris-Roubaix is tire pressure. So I've been experimenting with tire pressure in my shed, or like he has like a bike room that he does bike stuff in. And he said, but on the other hand, Milan-San Remo, like I've been like thinking about like using a technique for mountain biking.
Wow.
And like I had this as a recording, but it was all off the record, so I couldn't use it. But he was like, yeah, I like been improvising with a drop or seat post. And I didn't know what that was because like I don't follow mountain biking, so he had to explain it to me. I was like, yeah, okay, like sounds reasonable. And so he was talking about this plan. This was in October of last year. That is how long ago he planned that. Like that was
interesting.
That was the best one-day race of the entire season.
When you were watching it, I mean, it was. I agree. It was one of the best.
Yeah,
were you just sitting there like, wait a second?
I knew that was gonna happen.
I was like, oh my god, Matthew, you nutter! I can't believe you. I was like, wow, this is so great. I can't wait to write 3,000 words about this.
You'd mentioned that last time we met, and I was just like thinking about that after. I was like, oh my god, like
Mohoric, he's great. I mean, he is like when I couldn't talk to him at the tour, he would call me.
Nice.
That is so nice.
I mean, it must help to have a guy like that inside to kind of spread the word about you too, right?
He just like. I mean, I won't say that we're friends because that's not true. And now we've become way more distant because of all the stuff that's happened with the team and because I started getting involved in some more investigative journalism stuff. Like, our relationship is not the same. But at that certain point in my life, like, he was the most important cyclist to me. And he was, like, very generous towards me when I was still learning how to be a journalist. In some ways, I think maybe he took a little bit advantage of me during his, like, his position where he was kind of subjugated with the doping stuff. But at the same time, like, he is extremely smart. He's the smartest guy probably in cycling. And he is a great storyteller. I mean, if you get him seated down, he will tell you anything about cycling. He will tell you, he was like sitting down, he was like, yeah, I mean, when I was in high school, Paolo Schlongo was my doctor. That was Nibli's.
Wow.
Yeah. And I was just like, why are you telling me this? But like, okay, like, yeah, he's like, I was fully joined. I wanted to be on an Italian team. And he was on liquid gas. And then when he went to Cannondale, he was like, now when Liquid Gas ended and Cannondale took over, he was suddenly in like the things with Jonathan Vaughters, and he had the worst time of his life in America.
Oh my God, I just remembered he was on that team.
Yeah, and then he was like, I was like, how is America? Like, because I'm American. He was like, first of all, what's wrong with your supermarkets and why are the apples all the same size? I don't understand. He went on for like 5 minutes about the apples. And I was like, so true, so true, so true. Terzico Proibito, which is like so true, you can nail it to the wall.
Oh, right.
And then I was like, yeah, like, what's going on? And then he was like, okay, so I had a miserable time because they made me do like tour of Utah, tour of California, tour of Colorado, and I have altitude sickness. I can't be at altitude like for more than a couple of days because like I get extremely sick. I don't do altitude training. When I'm at Bahrain Victorious, I never do altitude training because I have altitude sensitivity. And so he's like, okay, so I spent these like several months at altitude.
Yeah.
I got fat from American food. And he's like, I didn't win anything.
Nachos.
He said I had the worst time of my life in California.
Was he
USA.
with Sagan at the time?
I don't remember. No, that was after Sagan, I think.
Okay.
He was with just Cannon. I think it was just called Cannondale at the time.
Okay.
But yeah, he was.
I know you we're keeping you, but I wanted to do a quick lightning round.
Yeah, good. Let's do it.
Give me 1 second. What was your first bike?
My first bike was so my first bike was a Celebration from Kmart when I was like, I learned to ride a bike really late in life. I was 12. And then I forgot, and then I had to learn again when I was 18. So it had streamers in the handlebars.
Ooh.
What's your current bike?
My current bike is a Bianchi Ultra XR3.
Favorite beverage?
My favorite beverage is gin martini.
Last book you read that really moved you?
The Cyclist in His Shadow.
If you could win one race, which would it be?
Ooh, that's hard. I have to say, if I could win one race, it would probably be... What's my favorite race? This is so hard because I can't tell if I want to win a Grand Tour or Classic. I think
life is hard.
Yeah, so true. I think if I had to win one race, I would win Paris-Roubaix.
Oh,
An album you always listen to,
An album I always listen to.
or will always listen.
Will always listen to. That's very interesting. I'm really into Fear Fun by Father John Misty.
I have to look that one up. Somewhere you've always wanted to go but haven't yet.
I've always wanted to go to Milan and I've never been.
If you could go back in time, where and when would you go?
If I could go back in time, it would probably be the final stage of the 1989 Tour de France.
Wow. And your favorite rider of all time?
My favorite rider of all time, that's really... my favorite rider of all time, Laurent Fignon.
I love Vigneault. You know how much I love Vigneault.
Do you have anything else, Joe?
No, I think that's good. I mean, I have plenty. But
Yeah.
I'll roll the dice that she'll come back and join us and
I'll be
answer
back.
more
Will you
questions.
please come back?
I will come back anytime.
It's been amazing having you, Kate
Yeah.
Wagner. And where can people find you? I mean, I think they know, but let's just do it for...
You can find me on Twitter at Derailer Kate. Derailer is in the part of the bike, and then Kate. And then derailer.net is my Substack. You can find me on Velo News, Cycling Tips, Cycling News, Rouleur, plenty of places. Yeah.
It's been awesome having you. Thanks so much for coming out. This has been great. And we actually hope to have you back really soon, and I really mean that.
And there's, you know what? And I'll also put a plug in for YouTube. If they look you up on YouTube, there's a lot of really cool stuff.
Wait, I'm on YouTube?
Oh, you're all over the place. Yeah, you're.
I love the TED Talk. I thought it was so
the
good.
TED Talk is on there. You've got some other podcasts that are on there. You have some architecture discussions that are on there. I mean, you've got a lot of different things on there, and you can really learn a little bit about Kate there.
Next time,
the whole architecture side, which
Yeah.
we didn't even touch.
We didn't even touch.
Next time
Next
we gotta
time.
talk Slovenia. We gotta talk the 1980s for sure.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, and I'll bring some a photo box full of like when you could go walk right up to right up and put your arm around Laurent Fignon and take pictures with him. And
has been awesome.
Cool.
Thanks so much for coming out.
Thank you. Yeah, anytime.
Thanks, Kate.
All right, ciao.
See ya.